what could happen if a generation of kids are educated by a generation of creative, entrepreneurial teachers who are genuinely passionate about their subjects.
Welcome back to the OpenEd podcast. I am your sometimes host, Isaac Morehouse, CEO of OpenEd. Today, I am joined by another CEO, Amir Nathoo, the CEO of Outschool. So Amir, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks. Pleasure to be talking.
Yeah, likewise. I'm really excited about this one. We've had to reschedule it several times, and I'm like, yes, we finally got it. We're here. Outschool is one of my favorite companies that I've been kind of following and paying attention to for a lot of years. It's just such a brilliant idea. So rather than me describe it, I want to hear what is the Outschool elevator pitch for those who are not familiar?
Absolutely. So Outschool is a marketplace of live online classes for kids. Teachers teach the classes that they always wanted to teach, everything from core subjects to enrichment of all types, and offer classes to their design for kids aged 3 to 18. And these classes take place in small groups or one-on-one over video chats. So you can access a learning group and a teacher from anywhere in the country or the world that exactly fits your child's needs. And that's the point. By offering tremendous variety of classes, both direct to parents, as well as through partnerships and institutions, we hope to offer unlimited customizability in education and true personalization. And that's more and more important in the future as we recognize that every kid is different, their needs change with time, and it's impossible for a single institution, school, to satisfy all the needs of even one kid, let alone all the needs of all kids. So we give people the option to customize their education, whether it's around traditional schooling choices or, quite frequently, around alternative education and homeschooling choices. And through that customization, not just getting better outcomes, but getting healthier, happier kids.
Listeners, you can see why this is such a perfect fit. I'm just over here getting goosebumps. I'm so excited. This is exactly the vision, the idea, that the principles behind everything that we do at OpenEd, everything that we're about in this podcast. I have to comment, just as somebody who loves marketing, company building, the name Outschool is so good. It's such a great way to meet people where they're at with a concept they're familiar with, like school, but to indicate that you're talking about something different, like Outschool. It's like outside of school, but it's like adjacent to school. Maybe it's a supplement, maybe it's a replacement. It's got this great power to it. So well done on the naming and branding.
Thank you. And, I feel the same way about OpenEd. I mean, it's very evocative of the kind of mission that you have.
Well, Outschool was taken, so we had to go with something else. I want to back up and get a little bit about your personal story. How did you end up in this space? And maybe it's something different than one of these two tracks, but usually it's either person who's just really interested in startups and innovation and entrepreneurship and then stumbled their way into the education space, or a person who's really passionate about education and figured out that entrepreneurship and startups was the way to do it. I don't know if you have one of those or something else, but I'd just love a little bit of your story and how you came into this.
Absolutely. And the story of how I came into this is a mix of professional and personal motivations. My professional background is I've been in software and tech my whole career. I've been a founder and entrepreneur for the majority of my career, working in a variety of different industries. But when I look at my personal background, that's very influential on my thesis behind Outschool and how I've arrived at this point, was both my parents were teachers. And they not only helped me with my traditional schooling, I was very fortunate to have excellent traditional schooling in the UK, but really importantly, helped me pursue interests outside of regular school, including helping me pursue my interest in programming. And this was way before we ever knew that this was going to be like a profession and an important skill. They did it not because of potential economic preparation or benefit, but because they believed that just helping me pursue my interests was going to be really valuable for my motivation, for my love of learning, and that it could turn into something interesting. And also through observing the times when they were in their teaching career, gave me a real appreciation of the incredible work and care and impact that teaching can have. So when it came time to think about what I was going to do next after my first company and after I'd been at Square, a growth stage tech company in Silicon Valley for a while, and I wanted to think about what's next, my mind turned to education. And so I started to think about what it was that I wanted for my own kids. And then I started developing these theses of, oh, actually, this is different than what I experienced in traditional education. And I bet that a lot of other people like me with young kids today who have grown up through all the changes with the internet and changes in the workplace are going to be thinking the same way. And so that was the kind of set of influences.
I don't remember the year that you started Outschool or when you started putting this together, but I'm wondering if it was around the time, because there was kind of like, you had Uber and Lyft, the ride sharing, the sharing economy, and then you had kind of like, oh my gosh, we need the Uber for everything or the sharing economy for everything. And Uber is a little different with like sort of the on-demand component, but this idea of marketplaces or what you can call like the unbundling of Craigslist, or, there's all these different paradigms and frameworks. But this was like the hottest thing in startups for a hot minute there. And everybody was like, I'm going to apply it to this niche or that niche. Like, my tennis lesson, we're going to connect you with a tennis instructor via an app just for tennis instructions. We're going to do it. A lot of those, like the theory is there. This is clearly one of those. Software is eating the world. The world is going this direction. But the execution or the business model or the product market fit was off for almost all of them. So many of these failed. This idea that like, I'm going to create the two-sided marketplace, people who have something to offer, people who want it. It's all decentralized. We're just the platform in the middle. They find each other. They advertise. You have all these problems mixed up in this industry, quality control issues. You have supply and demand, cold start problems. How did Outschool manage to make it through all of that pain and be one of the few who not only survived, but has really, really thrived in the marketplace business?
Yeah, that's a great question. You're absolutely right, on the influence of those marketplace models at the time. One of the first conceptions I had of Outschool was like Lyft Line or Uber Pool for education or Airbnb for education. So those models were definitely an influence. And you're right, but there were lots of people at the time trying to apply those models to various different industries. But I think there are some interesting aspects fundamental to the education domain which made it a particularly interesting model in education, more so than other industries. One is that when you think about the ideal of what personalized and customized education is, there's a massive long tail and huge variety. You're talking about human knowledge here. And, we like to put it in boxes like math, English, and science. But the reality of human knowledge is it's often interrelated, cross-disciplinary, and human development is deeply personal. So the structure of trying to create tremendous variety in order to meet that need for personalization is particularly applicable when you think about human knowledge and education. And sometimes product folks try and apply these models a bit blindly. You really need to get into like the fundamental structure of the domain you're about to tackle and see whether there's a fit. Product market fit is not just about making sure customers want what it is that you're providing. It's also thinking at this industry structural level about whether how you're building your company and the basic conceptual models you're using fit the domain. And there's a much stronger fit for this when it comes to personalized learning, number one. Number two, you might have a new model, but it might just not be the right time for an industry to transform. And I developed a concrete thesis about why now in education. And it rested on a generational shift in attitudes and the decline in trust in the traditional path. The traditional path being, all I have to do to make sure my kid is happy and successful is make sure they get into a good school, make sure they work hard, get good grades, go to a good college, and then they'll be set for life, and I'll feel happy about my role as a parent. Because we're dealing with accelerating change in the world. And I believed that trend was going to have big impacts in education. When I started the company in 2015, from an investor perspective, education was considered kind of a dead area, that this wasn't going to be success. It's all this trouble, like institutional
Trust
problems.
me, I know. I started an egg company in
schools.
2013 and 2016. So
Right.
it was
But-
not like an attractive area to anybody.
Yeah. But when you have a contrarian thesis, when you hear something like that, and you have a theory about why that's been true in the past but isn't now, that can lead to explosive growth, explosive opportunity. And I had a concrete thesis, which was around this generational shift. And the fact that it hadn't been transformed, that technology had not significantly transformed the basic structure of education, made it a more attractive opportunity, because I suspected that there's a reason why there's some friction points in the economy at back, but when it goes, it's going to be fast and it's going to be quick, because you have pressure building in the system. And the other thing I couldn't reconcile was the prevailing narrative on the business side that, American parents, don't really care about education. It's only a coastal, wealthy elite thing. It's the Asian parents, the aspirational immigrants. It's true, aspirational immigrants care a lot about education. But then I looked at it, I thought, how emotive is the subject of kids to parents? It's enormously emotive. People go to extreme lengths for their kids. And yet, from a business perspective, I was hearing this, your parents don't really care. No. Fundamentally, I developed this thesis that it was about the structure, the supply side, that was holding back this immense motivation for parents. And that was a cool part of the thesis.
I love that ability to see everyone believes that they have properly diagnosed something that's happening. Oh, well, parents are doing this because there's not enough demand for anything else or whatever. And the ability to look at an adjacent. So you could say, for example, 95% of parents just send their kids to the local public school. Therefore, they don't care. They're not interested in alternatives. That statistic alone might lead you to that conclusion. But then if you start looking, like in the neighborhood where I live, you look at what parents actually do all day, every day, school, sports, after school, whatever. Their entire life is dedicated to driving their kids around, managing their kids' homework. Their meals are based on that. Every part of their life is oriented around that. Because they happen to just be enrolled in a public school doesn't mean that they are not always looking for ways to improve their kids' lives. And they just haven't nobody's shown them something that is like what Outschool has, for example, that gives them something else. But you can look for other indicators for the level of investment they're willing to put into their kids. Even it's not
100%.
like, private school tuition. That's the only indicator that they're willing to sacrifice for their kids. No, because the difference between a local private and public school might not be that great. But all the time sacrifice and everything else is such an indicator. Parents are willing to bend over backwards.
100%. And you know what? This is so applicable to the conversation of education. This desire, this adult fault in our society to reach for oversimplistic solutions and believe traditional narratives without sufficient critical thinking, you start to wonder if this is happening in the business world amongst otherwise intelligent adults, and we call it, this is data-based, evidence-based. It's like, well, maybe there's something wrong in our critical thinking skills that we were brought up with. Maybe we should kind of address that. And then let me give you another example of this right now. You've got Jonathan Haidt going out there, and he's like the new Malcolm Gladwell, pursuing pseudoscience and policy suggestions, based on a narrative. And he draws a correlation between the growth in teen anxiety and the use of social media and online devices. And I don't dispute his correlation, but think about the causation. There are many explanations for that correlation. One is that social media is bad, full stop. Another is that social media is revealing how screwed up the adult world is, and anxiety is an appropriate, a rational response to that. And that's just one of many potential explanations for that correlation. I'm not saying that kids should have unfettered access to social media. I'm not saying there's dangers. But the overly simplistic, populist narratives that these guys promote are self-serving and dangerous. And that's what we need to address with education to prepare our kids for these. And by the way, I think the kids are more immune to this than we are as adults, but they're growing up in this world and they understand online misinformation and propaganda at a far more visceral level than we do instinctively.
That's so funny. I just had this experience last night. I took my youngest son. We went to there was a high school baseball championship game. So we go to this game and there's all these high school kids in the stands and players. And I was actually really impressed. I thought these kids, they were super engaged, energetic. It was fun. They were all talking to each other. They were cheering. And very rarely did I see anybody pull out a phone. And I thought, I've been to lots of my kids' sporting games with their parents who are in their 30s and 40s, and they're on their phone the whole time, barely watching the game. I was like, I wonder if the generation that's so worried about technology is the generation who they don't realize the younger kids, they've already started to figure out the difference between, and like figured out how to adapt. And it's like, us, the Gen X and millennials and boomers who are like, but
We blame our kids for our issues.
Yes, totally.
It's
Well, I love
happening.
that you said that too, because I think this is a really real issue for parents who are, sort of doing some form of what we call open education, homeschooling, or hybrid learning, or something more customized. What is that role of technology? And it's so easy, like you pointed to the Jonathan Haidt sort of thing. Like you could say, oh, look, since the invention of refrigerators, obesity and disease has increased. Therefore, refrigerators are bad. It makes it too easy for us to have too much fresh food around. And I think because that's an old technology, it's easiest for us to see how that's dumb. But I think it's the exact same thing. It's like, yes, if we have other issues, things that we are not very good at, lack of choice will make it harder for us to exercise our bad judgment. And more choice will make it easier for us to exercise our bad judgment. The judgment is the problem, right? We need to learn how to balance these things, and we cannot just blame the refrigerator for too much food or the technology for too many of these other problems. How do we figure out how to use it well? And I think I really love that you are kind of like recognizing, because a lot of the people who recognize problems with the traditional approach to schooling, they just sort of like lump everything together, and they have this
Yes.
instinct to just escape. Like I got to go
Yes.
live off the grid and just have my kid like play in the woods, and that's it.
Yeah.
Because everything else is like industrial, and like technology has made everything worse, and they want to go backwards. And I think the real solution is, how do we take the technology and harness it and use it so that we are masters of it, not slaves to it? And I'd love to just hear you riff on that a little bit.
Absolutely. Well, you can play with technology in the woods.
Yes.
We figured out batteries and cell access and stuff like that.
Oh yeah. What's an axe but a piece of technology,
They're not at odds. So I'm really glad you brought up that point. And you often get this kind of black and white thinking, either or, when it comes to technology. Technology and the tools we build are immensely powerful tools of our civilization. And so you're doing kids a disservice if you do not give them access to it at appropriate ages. That doesn't mean it's a free-for-all. Doesn't mean you need scaffolding, you need some structure, and you need some boundaries, all for sure. But access to technology should be a key part of education, because if you go too far in restricting it, then how are you going to prepare your kids for the future? How are you going to prepare your kids for the future? How are you going to future-proof their education? Because the reality is technology is continuously transforming our society. It's accelerating in its rate of adoption, and that's going to keep happening in our lifetime. How you do it, I think, is hard, and everyone struggles with this. I struggle with this as a parent. We put in some boundaries. It also depends on your kid.
How old are your kids, by the way?
6 and 3. And, my 6-year-old loves Minecraft. He loves his iPad. He'll play on it for hours. I used to play on my computer for hours. Yeah, but one thing I've noticed about my kids, and I realize this is not true for everyone, and everyone has their different challenges and different opportunity, but he does get bored. He will, even if given complete freedom, eventually put down his iPad. Now, usually I intervene and we set timers and we set boundaries, but it does happen. So that it's not that it's completely unregulated, even if I was to completely leave him to his own devices. And most kids have some kind of regulation like that. They often like diving into something for extended periods of time and get really into something for like 3 or 6 months and then change and go do something else. And it's uncomfortable for adults because we're used to a more integrated way of being. Whereas kids do go deep, and you wonder, oh, will they ever exit this phase? Oh my God, will they ever go to sleep? Or like, oh God, are they just going to be stuck on their iPad? It comes in phases, and it freaks adults out. It's tough. Yeah. There's no good science to this yet, and there's no like single policy that anyone has. Oh, just do this formula, and your kid's going to be fine. I think it's about being responsive to your own child as you design this.
Yeah. And that's really, so much of this podcast is these kinds of conversations to say, hey, let's just tease out different stories and different approaches and different outcomes. And you kind of take what works for you and learn. And we're all kind of learning out loud together. It's funny. This is actually an amazing tie-in. I didn't tell you this before, but I've got my own little Outschool story.
Cool.
My son, he's almost 8. And like your child, he loves Minecraft. And so and I'm not technical at all. Unlike you, I am not a coder. So he plays Minecraft, and we kind of have like limits around like, okay, if he's going to watch a video about Minecraft, pretty small amount of those. If he's going to play Minecraft himself, he can do that more. And then to me, I'm always like the highest level is, are you doing something like creative, sort of the consuming to creating continuum? the more you're leaning toward the creative side, the less worried I am about that screen time
100%.
versus just consuming a bunch of content. And so he said on his own, he's like, I want to learn how to make mods. And in my head, because I remember my older son years ago, even trying to download a mod and install it without having like a virus destroy the computer was like pushing the limits of my capabilities. And I was immediately stressed. I was like, oh my gosh, I want to say yes to my kid. And I'm like, okay, well, we could maybe do that. And I was kind of stalling. He's like, you said you'd help me make mods. And I'm like, oh my God. He's 7. Was he? How he's going to make a mod? Like, we don't know how to code, whatever. So I do some Googling around. I ask ChatGPT. I find like M Creator, some software tool. I find like Minecraft Education Edition, but I couldn't really access it unless I had a .edu. I wasn't sure. So we kind of narrowed in. We got M Creator. We tried to play around with it. We did 1 or 2 things badly by watching some YouTube videos. Finally, it just dawned on me. Oh, I bet there's something on Outschool. So I go to Outschool and I'm like, Minecraft mod creation classes. And he's only 7. So like he's pretty young for this type of stuff. He's almost 8. 2 options came up. One of them said 9 and older. And I asked the teacher, could you let him sneak in? He's not quite 8. He's like, I'm sorry, I'm not going to let him. And they come back when he's 9. And I'm like, I respect that. It looked like an amazing class. They used M Creator and all this stuff. I find the other one and it was a younger age range. And so I'm like, all right, we're going to sign you up for this for the next 6 weeks, every Friday for 1 hour. He hops on Zoom. And there was only one other kid in the class. And I'm so glad that they still did it with just 2 kids. This great instructor who gets on there, he's got his cat walking around on his desk. My son thinks he's great. He's up there, him and this other kid, and they're just screen sharing and walking through. After the 6 weeks, he's like, oh, let me show you. I created like this custom block and this, and this, that. And I'm like, good. I don't know how to do that. He already knows more than I do about this. And it was just such a, like, I came to that moment of like, I want to inspire my kid to pursue his interests, but his interests are outside of my scope. Neither my wife or I are good at this. Just like it would be if he wanted to repair engines. I don't know about that kind of stuff. So it's like, where do I go? You can do YouTube videos, but that requires so much focus from either me or him. It was just so great to have a live, real person there talking him through, doing the, screen sharing, going, it was, and I just thought like, I'll wrap it up. I know I'm rambling, but what I love about it is you mentioned the long tail. I almost think rather than thinking of it as like a Lyft or Uber or Marketplace, it's almost like YouTube, if instead of just having a passive consumption of a video, it was like, because you can find a video about anything on YouTube with the long tail. Can I find a person who will walk me through live and I can ask them questions while they're going? That's Outschool. And it's just so cool that there's all these niches. Then my other daughter who wanted to learn hair braiding, she found someone to do a hair braiding course with her and she went through and she got a mannequin head and now she's doing all kinds of different hair braids. It's really, really awesome to use it.
That's so funny. I had exactly the same experience. So, I can program. I still can't play Minecraft. Like, it's very complicated unless you invest significant time to kind of learn the system. I mean, I'm sure I could if I invested time, but when do you have time to do that? And my son wants it right now. I had exactly the same thing. He's got, I don't know how much money I spent money on a Minecraft tutor of all things. He had one-on-one tutoring sessions to learn some specific things, and now he's in a group class and he absolutely loves it. And he's building worlds in a collaborative way with these other kids, supervised by a teacher who's helping the kids use Minecraft. He does that every Sunday afternoon and absolutely loves it. And this is the thing about screen time. And I really like how you do that continuum from consumption to creative. And you can also draw one with another dimension about interactivity as well with other humans. And not all screen time is created equal. Just watching stuff on YouTube is completely different to building a virtual world or learning a tool or building a virtual world with others. And the great thing about kids interacting and building virtual worlds is, ultimately you want to build in the real world. But when you're a kid, it's not safe to let kids do real world business building or the physical activity. Or maybe they don't yet have the strength or physical capabilities to do certain things, but in virtual worlds, they can practice. And you can start that practice young. And kids instinctively want to learn the powerful tools of adult society. And these are playgrounds that can be used for that purpose. And so that's the thing about screen time. Not all screen time is created equal. And some of it is incredibly powerful and valuable for kids.
You can see the difference. If I have a kid who has spent the last hour whatever, watching YouTube videos or something, they're like, they have a different look on their face and they need a few minutes detox. They're a little edgy. Like you could just tell certain versus he would come away from those Outschool classes brimming with creativity and excitement. And you could not convince me that was a bad use of his time. He shouldn't have been on a screen. It's like, yes, that's the way that these tools are really effectively used in a positive way. Well, I want to come back to, we started kind of on the Outschool origin story. And I know for those of you who tune in because you love the education component, there's a little bit of like startup-y, businessy side to this, but I find it so fascinating. I think it's really interesting to most people anyway. So 2015, you had the thesis, you had the idea. Once you got it started, I'm really curious about that cold start problem. Because if you try to get customers to go and you say, find any class on our platform, and they go and they can only find 3 classes, and they search for 5 different things and no classes come up for any of them, they leave and never come back. Conversely, if you go to course providers and say, hop on here, we'll bring the students, and they list their classes and nobody buys them, they leave. How did you get that supply demand matching thing solved?
That's one of the core strategic challenges that any marketplace faces. It's what makes building a marketplace a much more challenging business model than most other types of products and business structures. There are many ways to fail at doing that. A couple, and also, several different ways to succeed. One of the key ways to fail is just to try and recruit supply and recruit demand independently, and also go too broad too early. You really need to pick a niche to try and create initial marketplace liquidity. And by liquidity, I mean that when someone comes in looking for a class, there's enough supply that there's a greater chance they can buy something. And similarly, if someone's going to list a class on your marketplace, you have enough demand. And the way we solved that was by really focusing in on a narrow niche, which initially was gifted homeschoolers in person in the San Francisco Bay Area, and then using the fact that this early adopter audience is highly networked. Highly networked, meaning the way they transmit information is through the network, through personal connections, through Facebook groups, through Yahoo mailing lists, a lot of word of mouth sharing of knowledge that often happens in these early adopter communities where there's not much external support. It's almost like, I think, how humans used to organize before we developed kind of more scaled structures. That happens at the edges of markets. And that's why going to the edges of markets, even though they seem small from a business perspective, is an incredibly powerful strategy for disruptive innovation. And so, we talk to tutors who served this market and say, oh, what parents do you work with? Would you mind can we interview them? And then we'd say, hey, I know you've got these parents that you already work with, but why don't you list the class on your site and we'll get you others? And then they said, okay, and we're willing to give it a shot. We were very hands-on in helping to make it very easy. So it felt like a kind of a low-risk proposition for them. That's the other thing, being very tactical and hands-on, especially with the early adopters, before you've really got scale or a product. And then we went to the parents who already worked for that teacher and said, great, you work with this tutor. We're going to try and get him on our platform. Who else do you work with? And those parents tell you, oh, well, actually, we work with this program, this institution, this other teacher. Then you approach those, keep on doing it. And you end up basically facilitating the connections that might otherwise be made informally, but be quite laborious, because this is how the information travels through the community. You use the tactics that match what's already happening. You just make it easier for the participants by helping manually along the way, and later on your product helps in this way. And in doing that, you're also not, you end up with a supply and demand that's not random. It's the kind of supply that this particular kind of demand tends to want, because it's kind of quite close in the network, and vice versa. So it's close enough that they want it, but far enough away that they'd have to ask a few people to actually access it, and it becomes easier to access through your site. So that kind of exercising the real world network is a successful tactic, and one that we used in order to get to initial scale. And then once you get to an initial scale, you can start to shift to more traditional marketing tactics, because those start to work.
Yep.
And you've also, by that point, developed understanding through this process about what messages are going to resonate with different groups and types of parents. And so you can start to move to more of that scaled traditional marketing approaches. But doing that too early, or not doing this first part, is usually where marketplace businesses fall down.
Man, I love hearing you say that. So much you have this surge of software, digital everything. And so you get this explosion of startups and founders. And it's so easy to be like, okay, I can build a business where I just put something out there in the digital world and then people just find it and I just make money. And I don't have to like go interact with people face to face, right? I set it up and everybody shows up. And the reality of that first stage is 100% in the trenches. Like we call it live in market with our team all the time. Like you got to live in the market, right? With people. It's interesting that I was wondering if you were going to say you chose a very specific niche based on geography and really like the demographic of the customer themselves, because they are so highly networked that makes the next expansion easier. Because if you were to go, we're a platform for algebra classes, then like it's less clear what's that move to the next thing. How do you go from algebra to yoga? I think that again, it's a human. It's like the real humans involved and physically in real life going and talking to them and teasing out of them those connections that they have. And it's
100%.
Not something you can do from a spreadsheet.
100%. And yeah, at the time, investors thought we were insane to not focus by subject or age. We left that really broad. But the thing, if we constrained it too much, then, what if we talk to a parent like, oh, but I already have my algebra covered. I have this other need. But if we're constrained, then we wouldn't be able to have anything to say to them. We wouldn't be able to ask them for anything. And it would be also a completely different type of business compared with what we're trying to create, which is this mass customization and this broad customization. So you've got to fit the tactics to the structure of the domain and the structure of what it is you're trying to build.
I love that. I was recently talking to a group of micro school founders who are like just getting started and on a much different scale, even though it's not a digital business necessarily, they often face a similar, like, how do I get my first customers? And there's this tendency to say, because I'll say, okay, who is your micro school for? And they're like, everyone. It's like, it's not, when you first start, it's almost like whoever your ideal customer is, if in real life, there are places where like 10 of them are together in the same place at once, that's probably a good sign, right?
100%.
If you're like, oh, they're never all together in the same room at once. They're all spread out. How are you going to get to them, right? Like,
totally. And as you get more scaled, you can broaden your horizons. But, this is actually one thing I wanted to riff with you on and maybe ask you about, but I think it's a challenge in alternative education right now. Because the boundaries are blurring. When we started, we're very clear. We're targeting homeschoolers first in this very narrow part of it, and then broadly to homeschoolers. And it was quite clear how to identify them, because it's like, well, people who have made the decision to pull their kid out of school, traditional public school, and not enroll them in a private alternative or charter alternatives. They're doing something different. Quite easy to identify. Now, alternative education has blossomed to being far more than homeschooling. You've got like part-time enrollment, dual enrollment, micro schools. Parents who are making alternative educational choices who are values and attitudinally aligned to the vision I've set. But it's harder now, and we can have like proxies for it, but it seems like an attitudinal segment. I've been, me and my team have been trying to figure out, well, how do we characterize what we mean by alternative education, identify when a family is doing it. And, I think that what the best we've come up with so far is thinks expansively about education, but that's kind of vague and fluff. It's hard to like determine that from a survey. Or the other one maybe is a member of more than one educational institutions is one that I've been playing with. If you consist of, oh, my kid goes to that school and that school alone, that doesn't feel alternative. But if it's, oh, they go to a traditional public school and they also are a member of this supplemental program, or they do this 3-day-a-week homeschool co-op and then unschool the rest of the time, that's kind of a member of two different categories of education. That's what I'm playing with. Well, let's get your take on that. Or if you've got other proxies you use to actually define what alternative education is.
This is exactly the exercise we went through when we rebranded from My Tech High to OpenEd. And we actually just decided we are going to try to just define a new category called open education, because alternative education is broader than, say, homeschooling, and it works often, but it's still, at least in my mind, it conjures up, it's like, go to the public school, or if you can afford it, go to the private school, which just looks very similar to the public school in structure, or you pull your kids out and you homeschool. And then you might have like alternative. I think a lot of people still think of like Montessori school or a Waldorf school. It's a school, but it's just like a different methodology or pedagogy. What we saw, the exact thing you're seeing, like if you ask my own kids, are you homeschooled? They would probably answer yes, but they might not. It's unclear sometimes. I have
Yeah.
had a kid who will take a one class or a sport at a public school, a homeschool co-op, something from a charter school, unschool on Fridays. Like you mentioned, this is becoming more and more normal. Or people who are like, hey, my kid goes to school, but I just decided that they're not going to go on Fridays because now I work from home on Fridays. But I still want them enrolled in the public school. So on Fridays, they do a little Khan Academy. And like that didn't used to be possible, or at least people didn't think it was possible. And so we love calling that an open education. You have opened it up and you're not only in one box. I like the way you put it. Anyone
Yeah.
who's doing two or
Yeah.
more at the same time has basically said they may have it open to varying degrees. They may just have it open a
Yeah.
crack, right? But like the box is
Yeah.
closed. You're all in one school all day, every day. That is closed. And that that
Totally.
may work for some people. There's nothing wrong with that. But recognizing, okay, 10% of this doesn't work, or 50% of it doesn't work, or 80% of it doesn't work, or 0% of it is working.
Yeah.
You open up that box to varying degrees and then say, I'm going to modularly
Totally.
add this one component. Now you're an open educator. You've opened it.
Totally. And it's an ecosystem. So I
Yes.
love that. The other kind of verbiage, I love this. It seems better than alternative education. So maybe we need to shift kind of the verbiage in the industry there. But then the other kind of verbiage I've started to play with, networked schooling, and that you're members of multiple networks. But saying that you're members of multiple schools still gives it a sense of a physical presence, whereas it might be geographically distributed. For example, my son goes to an alternative micro school in San Francisco, and then he spends also a lot of time on Outschool. So he has multiple other memberships, but probably the two biggest ones are those two. But certainly the Outschool one is not local, and within Outschool, he's a member of multiple different kind of groupings. And so networked schooling is something I'm playing with, but
I
we
love
share
that.
this vision of openness and integration of multiple different approaches.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
the ability to shift between those networks, those
Yes.
domains, that is if the point of education is to prepare you to be independent as an adult and live in the real world responsibly and successfully,
Yeah.
the more that it can mirror that, the better. And if you think of, we don't live in a world where our entire existence is contained in one box and one set of networks. We have our friends that we only do sports stuff with. We have our friends
Yeah.
at church. We have our work friends and our life over there. We have our stuff that we do, in our
Yeah.
garden. We have all these domains and spheres that overlap, and sometimes they don't. And there's, and sometimes you introduce your friends from here into this part of your world and then you regret it. So you keep them separate or
Yeah.
whatever, right? Like navigating multiple layers, and both vertical and horizontal. You don't only hang out with people at your exact age and
Yeah.
station in life. You've got older and younger. And the sooner that kids can have a little bit more of experience of that
Yeah.
complexity and networks of, hey, I go here, and they do to an extent if you throw in like extracurriculars, like, okay, I go to school, 7 a.m. to 3 every day. Then I do karate 2 days a week after work. Okay, now they've got one sort of adjacent thing, but realizing that, well, at school, I love everything but these two classes I really hate. What if I removed those and learned that somewhere else?
Yes.
I love the way that this is unfolding and crossing that chasm from my parents homeschooled in the 80s. I grew up homeschooled. We homeschool our kids, early adopters, hardcore. We're doing it all on our own. Now we've crossed the chasm, especially since COVID, to the pragmatists.
Yes.
Who are like,
yes.
I don't have any strong feeling about one being better or worse. I'm not doing this for some really strong ideological or religious reason.
Right.
I just know that my kid is miserable in this class or in this school. I just need something that's better. And or maybe I work from home now. So it'd be great if like 2 days a week, my kid could be home with me. And we're just seeing this flowering, which gets me so excited.
It's incredible. And I think the reason it succeeds is because it's a better structural model for how humans actually are. You have these different parts to yourself, you have these different interests, you have these different identities, and they're intersectional. And the structure should reflect that. And there's no reason it can't now, because in the past we were held back by logistics. That it was very hard to deliver against all of those parts. But this is what we've solved with the structures that Airbnb created, Lyft and Uber, that we can do that now. And it's just a better model. But of course, it's always hard when you're trying to transition an entire system and way of thinking in a domain as emotive and the feeling of high stakes as education. But honestly, that's part of the fun of the work.
Oh, well, what I love about your role at Outschool in particular is, we've been talking most of this time about the learners, what's good for the learners, how do they learn, how can we adapt to that, how can we be more open and flexible. The teaching side, there are people with expertise and knowledge to offer that previously had no way besides going and getting a full-time teaching job, which probably involves a lot of stuff outside of their domain. Now they can be entrepreneurs in some micro sense or even a huge sense. I'm sure you have people on Outschool making tons of money and building huge businesses. And you probably have other people who teach one or two classes a year and make a
100%.
couple $100 on the side doing something that they love doing. And I think it's
100%.
so amazing. And for my kids to see that example, to be like, oh, this guy that taught me this Minecraft class, he's just a guy that's good at doing Minecraft mods. I could do that. What am I good at?
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
my
We
wife, I'm
there's
like,
like
you should do a
professional.
class on like
Yeah.
making soups and stews.
Yeah.
You're so good at it. And like, it's just so fun to open up that entrepreneurial part for the people on the teaching side of the market, and seeing many teachers who felt trapped in a system that was increasingly make it hard for them to really serve students start to have all these options like micro schools, like Outschool. That part is just thrilling because that changes the whole economy.
100%. And as you say, both opening it up for adults who have knowledge and aptitude for working with kids, even if they're not professional teachers, to offer things like in the Minecraft class, like learn critical thinking skills through Dungeons and Dragons, or share about their profession. Like we have vets teaching animal anatomy, but then also credentialed professional teachers
Yes.
who maybe had a family and wanted to go back only part-time and have flexibility and love the option of online learning, or who have just discovered, oh, I can earn more with less bureaucracy teaching in this way. And so we aim to treat all of our teachers as creative entrepreneurial professionals, which is what teaching is. And unfortunately, there's so many roadblocks within the traditional system to teachers acting like that. And so when you remove those blocks and give them an option, then many take it. It's truly exciting to think about what could happen if a generation of kids are educated by a generation of creative entrepreneurial teachers who are genuinely passionate about their subjects. They're given the freedom to teach the way they always wanted to teach. That sounds like the future to me.
It's amazing. You take, because it's easy to only think about the good things of the past when you're frustrated with things in the present, but you take the good elements of the concept of the one room schoolhouse, the ability for the teacher to focus and whatever, and you combine it with the good elements of a system that's much larger and has much more resources and support. It's like every teacher can spin up their own little one room schoolhouse one day a
Right.
week for 6 kids to do that one thing. And then the kid can kind of pop from this one room schoolhouse to this one and
Yeah.
to this one. Okay. So we're coming up at the end here. I know you are clearly a visionary, very entrepreneurial thinker. So I got to ask you, without giving any secrets or anything, what are you looking at now? What's the next big horizon? What are some things that you're thinking about, with Outschool, whether you have concrete plans and roadmaps to get there or whether you're just sort of playing with it up in your head?
I think a lot, obviously, about what's happening with school choice and ESAs and the public funding now available for families embarking on these alternatives. And I think that's just incredible. And that wasn't present at the start of Outschool's journey. So we're very, very focused on enabling families to access those funds, to use it on supplements through Outschool, and to help in other ways. And then, so from a market perspective, I think that's one of the most interesting trends. Obviously, from a technology perspective, AI is an incredibly interesting trend. So we have some theses that are quite different from other education companies on how AI can be used. And from a product perspective, and from a perspective of how to think about AI and its impact on education, I think about two things. I think about navigation. One of the challenges of choice is it's overwhelming and it's complicated. Sure, marketplaces like us have tools in order to be able to help people navigate the variety, but there's now immensely more power available both on the technology side through AI, but also through human navigation services that can help make choice less overwhelming. So very focused on how can we provide more navigation services, both human and technological, to make choice less overwhelming. And then secondly, we think about expansion to different types of learning, because right now we offer online learning in groups and one-on-one. And many educational use cases can be well satisfied using those. But through a combination of partnerships or bringing different kinds of teaching and educational experiences into our product and onto our platform, what we aspire to be is provide even more variety, not just in terms of the class content, but in terms of the delivery mechanisms. And then how do you put that all together? How can we provide simple navigation of a vast array of different educational modes and content types and provide that in a very cost-effective to the family way using public funds? That's a brief summary of where we're headed and what I'm thinking about.
I love it. I absolutely love it. I don't know if I can say much about this, but I'll give a little teaser. We're definitely OpenEd Academy, which I have not talked about yet on this podcast, has just got the wait list launched at openedacademy.com, but we're going to have a lot more on that coming soon. But we are cooking up a pretty awesome partnership with Outschool that will have more details coming on, both with our traditional OpenEd program as well as OpenEd Academy. So, Amir, this has been absolutely awesome. I love what you guys have done over there at Outschool. It's truly one of the best things in the business, one of the best things I've seen in the opening up of education in the last 10 years. So keep up the good work, man.
Thank you. And likewise, we're so excited by the partnership possibilities we have in our shared vision for education. So thank you.
You bet.